You know, I want to take this moment because you spoke about President Trump, and he may be watching right now. And I just want to speak directly to the president, which is that I will not be a mayor like Mayor Adams, who will call you to figure out how to stay out of jail. I won't be a disgraced governor like Andrew Cuomo, who will call you to ask how to win this election. I can do those things on my own. I will, however, be a mayor who's ready to speak at any time to lower the cost of living. That's the way that I'm going to lead this city. That's the partnership I want to build, not only with Washington, D.C., but anyone across this country.
So today, Zohram Mamdani came on Fox News for an interview, which was a little surprising. You knew we were going to react to it. But I got to be honest with you, at times, this felt like a major softball. I mean, she first of all spends the first 5 minutes asking him about Israel, to which I say, I understand that's a major geopolitical issue at the moment, and Zohram has controversial views on it. But at the same time, he's running to be the mayor of New York City. Like, shouldn't you at least lead the interview off with New York-based issues? But okay, fair enough. Finally, later on, there do start to be some interesting questions posed about, first of all, how are you going to pay for your delusional agenda when, first of all, you have no power to raise taxes? That's Kathy Hochul's job. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, major wealthy business leaders are going to be leaving your city because they're so terrified of your crazy campaign platform. Or most importantly, finally at the end, I would argue it should have led the interview because it is the single worst threat of Zohram Mamdani's candidacy. It's not even just the socialist economics. It is the crime policy, right? The fact that you want to, in your own words, reduce the prison population by half. You claim that violence and violent crime is simply an artificial social construct. What exactly is going to be the outcome of all of that? Well, needless to say, although, like I said, she kind of goes easy on him, you start to see the stumbling or the way in which his kind of vague platitudes or feel-good talking points come apart when you're asked sincere questions about how this is actually all going to work. But nonetheless, we'll tell you about it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And that said, we got a lot to react to, so let us just tune in and show you live what happens when Zohram Mamdani is asked very basic questions about how exactly any of these ideas are supposed to work.
Move on to New York. You want to be the mayor of New York City, which, you know, last night I chat GPT'd, where is the capitalist and global finance center of the world? And it said New York City, which made me feel good as someone who loves New York City. Is that a moniker that you're proud of and one that you want to continue for this city?
We should be proud of it, and I will also say that that's one thing you have in common with Andrew Cuomo, because he also uses ChatGPT to answer many questions, including how to actually resolve the housing crisis in the city. And
Right.
It's time that we are not only proud of us being the financial capital, the cultural capital, but also we should make it a capital of where working people can afford to live in this city. Because right now what we're seeing is that 1 in 4 New Yorkers are being priced out of the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world.
That's absolutely true. One of the things that's also true is that JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs have moved major operations to Texas. They've not abandoned New York, but they're hedging their bets on New York because of the increased taxes that they see coming if you become mayor. So when they do that, jobs move out of the city as well. So how does that help affordability if people in the city don't have the jobs that they once had here?
Well, I'm looking to make this a city that every person chooses, whether they're a business leader or they're someone who works for that business. And the key ways of doing that are actually delivering quality of life, public safety, and affordability for each and every person. Because what we're seeing right now is we have a broken status quo. We have a corrupt political system, and we have the politicians that sustain that. That's really what's on the ballot, is whether New Yorkers want to continue that or whether they actually want a city they can afford. That's what I'm going to deliver.
So that's a complete non-answer to the question. He talks about ChatGPT, but that was a ChatGPT answer, okay? It totally misdirects the point. Because that is very relevant, first of all. If you're going to have well, actually, let me start by saying this. Zohram Mamdani is genuinely smart and politically savvy, I'll give him that, because to make the campaign about affordability is something that genuinely does affect a lot of Americans, but especially New Yorkers, right? And so by actually focusing his socialist far-left campaign on economic issues rather than the weird, like, woke gender and crime stuff, although he does engage in it, but again, by making his identity about affordability, he is smart. But here's the fundamental problem with all of that, right? So, you know, the way you're going to help people financially is ultimately at the end of the day, you have to make them upwardly mobile, right? They have to actually get like more opportunities essentially in life, raise their salary, work better jobs, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all of these little kind of varnishings on the end of, hey, we're going to help you by lowering the grocery bill by like $1 through the government grocery stores, or especially free buses, right? You no longer have to pay $2 for the bus. Okay, that might be a little temporary fix. It might save you like $100 a month or something, but it's not fundamentally going to be making your life better. Now, in order to actually, you know, economically prosper, people have to be working better jobs and moving up in their careers. But guess what? They cannot do that if all the businesses are leaving New York City because of your socialist redistribution of wealth and obviously other issues of taxation and crime and all of these different things. See, understand the problem actually with what he is saying, and he has no answer to that because he cannot answer that. Furthermore, even when it comes to the redistribution of wealth, how are you going to do that when all of the wealth leaves, right? And this is the fundamental problem with like socialist ideas. It's like, you know, you cannot really move people up in society. And by the way, there's a reason why quality of life basically improves for nobody under socialism without people actually like producing things that make life better, right? You can't just like take it from other people, you know, indefinitely, right? Forever. But anyways, that's very important to actually ask and keep in mind. And he has no answer to that because fundamentally, his like delusional Looney Tunes idea here of fixing affordability actually doesn't even address the issue, right? Free buses are not saving people's lives. But when people's jobs leave for other states, yeah, that seems like a much bigger problem to me, Zohram.
Governor Hochul, you would have to get approval from the legislature to raise individual taxes, income taxes, and also corporate taxes in New York, which you've said you would like to do in order to pay for the free buses and the free childcare and the different programs, the government grocery stores and the like. She says no new taxes in her governor's race. So what are you going to do if she won't allow taxes to be raised? How will you pay for these programs?
You know, I've said time and again that I believe these are the most straightforward ways that we can actually fund universal childcare, making buses fast and free. Mm-hmm. And I've said that the two clear ways to do so, raising personal income taxes on the top 1% by 2%, and raising the corporate tax to match that of New Jersey's corporate tax of 11.5%. Now, if there are other ways to raise this money to fund this agenda, the most important thing is that we fund the agenda. I still think that these are the most important and clear ways we can do it. And I'm thankful to have Governor Hochul's support in this race and the fact that she said we have a shared commitment to delivering universal childcare for New Yorkers across the city and the state.
I think that's great. I think everybody would love to have free health care and free buses and all these things. But the question is, how do you pay for it? The city's already in debt. The governor says no to new taxes. Like Margaret Thatcher said, you know, socialism's great until you run out of everyone else's money, other people's money.
Well, what Andrew Cuomo said is that if he had $959 million, he'd give it to Elon Musk in tax credits because that's exactly what he did. And I bring that up to you to say that it's often a question of whether you have the willingness to spend that money to benefit working class people, not where that money is in the first place.
So what would you cut? What would you draw from to do it?
I don't think we have to cut. I've spoken about raising taxes on the wealthiest. And frankly, this is an issue that we have here in New York City, and frankly, even across this country. When I've spoken to Trump voters right here in New York City, Hillside Avenue in Queens, Fordham Road in the Bronx, they've told me it was cost of living that drove them to vote for Donald Trump. They've told me it was a promise of a lower actual, whether it be cheaper groceries, whether it be childcare, whether it be rent. Right. And what we're seeing time and time again is we're more focused on the question of billionaires and the most profitable corporations than we are on people who can't even afford to make ends meet in this city.
Well, we know.
Okay. You know, that all sounds great, I guess. Not really, but you know what I mean. But Kathy Hochul said she's not going to raise taxes. You are arguing the only way we can do this is to raise New York State taxes. You're running for the mayorship. You have no power to do that. So what is the solution? He doesn't even have one. He just deflects back to, well, we're going to raise taxes. You just got told you cannot do that, and you don't have the authority to do that. So where's the money going to come from, right? What's the alternative solution? And then in like the peak of this delusion is she then asks him, okay, so maybe you cut another program to fund the free buses or whatever. He says, we don't have to cut anything, you know? Like this guy, and people claim, oh, he's so smart. You know, he's a real visionary. No, he's not. He doesn't have like a single answer as to how he's actually going to do anything. But, you know, as I said, right, in order to win an election, all you got to do is basically just tell people what they want to hear. And Zohram is kind of the master of that. Although if you think deeply on like a second, even third level of what the implications of any of what he's saying is, you realize he's a complete idiot, but well spoken. I'll give him that. You know, in a sense, I would argue Zohram almost gives you like Antichrist vibes. I'm not saying he's the Antichrist. I'm just saying in the sense that he's polished. He has like a smile that's almost creepy. It's way too big. Speaks very well. Is very convincing to a certain crowd of people. But a complete Trojan horse for, you know, like evil that like probably resides deep within his ideas. But, you know, people are going to fall for this. Okay.
Oh, affordability is an issue. And I think that all politicians are getting to an understanding of that. And I think that you've done a lot, actually, to bring people's attention to that issue. Let's take a look at the free buses issue just for a moment, because I know you said that the pilot project that you did was one of the biggest accomplishments of being an assemblyman. The Washington Post said this in an editorial about this. Quality inevitably declines when a service is offered for free. Vagrants and drug addicts would camp out all day on New York's buses, especially in the winter. Parents would go afraid to let their children ride alone. Wealthier residents would find another way to get around, but poor New Yorkers who depend on the bus would suffer the most. What do you say to that? Do you agree with that?
Well,
exactly what I have said about this issue, by the way. That's actually the most important point on free buses. It's not just about how we're going to pay for it, which clearly he can't. It's that even if we did pay for it, this would be the reality of free buses, right? Because much like turnstile hopping in the New York subway, what happens when you basically enable that, right? You're going to have a bunch of vagrants, yes, homeless people sleeping on the bus, just using it, violent criminals, you know, and then listen to Zohram's excuse for this, because it's really hilarious.
Well, I would say that they should actually look at the report of the 5 free buses we delivered across New York City. We didn't see an increase in homelessness. We did see an increase in New Yorkers riding the bus. We did see a decrease in assaults on bus drivers by 38.9%. And we also saw a decrease in New Yorkers who are having to take a cab or take their own car. They were actually getting on the bus. More than 10% of new riders were doing so. That's why we care so deeply about this, because of the fact that it can actually deliver economic, public safety, and even congestion relief to New Yorkers who are looking to take these buses.
So we've actually reacted to this very study that Zohram promotes before on the channel in one of our past videos. But to briefly recap, did you hear what he said? They piloted this on 5 buses, 5, in that whole gigantic city. One would venture to guess most people probably didn't even know about it. They just got on the bus and learned, oh, it was free. Okay? That is not the same as doing it citywide when everyone knows that they're free, first of all. Like that's where you're going to start to see vagrants and criminals and drug addicts take advantage of it, okay? First of all. Secondly, though, notice how he brings up the point that assaults against bus drivers went down 38%. What does he mean by that? What he means by that is because when they were charging the fare, criminals basically, or violent people, got mad because they didn't have the money to ride the bus, and so they would start fighting with the bus driver to get on the bus. And so obviously if it's free, it just drops because that encounter doesn't happen. Which I say, okay, so what you're saying is your policy makes it much easier for violent criminals and like the kind of dredges of society to get on the bus. And you think on a citywide level, that's not going to cause public safety problems, right? You don't think that's going to vindicate the idea. Yeah. The bus is going to be dangerous. People are going to be really scared to ride them. And the poor people who are actually like working class and trying to better their lives are going to be most affected by these public safety issues. Yeah, sure. Okay. Again, a pilot program for a month is just simply not the same as a permanent citywide policy, and we know that to be the case. But that said, on this issue of crime, let's now take a listen to Zohram being confronted on some of those issues of public safety, which again, I say, most important aspect of his terrible candidacy. But let's tune in.
I want to talk to you about public safety and your relationship with police. So just in terms of public safety, I want to go to an example first, because I hear from people that they don't feel safe walking home at night. There's drug addicts on the street, you know, right around the corner here. You can walk around the corner and see people shooting up. A lot of garbage on the streets right now. The subway is something that people are really concerned about. Last week, 64-year-old Nicola Tanzi, who was a church leader, a pillar in his community, was brutally beaten to death. I tried to watch this video in preparation. It's very hard to watch in a subway station in Brooklyn. 25-year-old David Mazarregos had a 20-inch sword. He's the suspect in this case. He was out. They lowered his bail so that he could get out. He was already waiting a trial for attacking someone in Chelsea. 33 past arrests. You were in favor of bail reform. Does that make you want to change your mind or think twice about reversing that?
This is a horrific incident, and it's the same video that I saw. And it's one that horrifies New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs, and it's completely unacceptable. And what it makes me think about is the necessity of providing public safety in our New York City subway system and across the 5 boroughs. And also, how do we end the revolving door? Because when you look further into the case of whether this individual or so many individuals, especially those suffering from mental health issues, what we find is so often the only mental health system that we have that's functioning in the city is Rikers Island. 40% of the incarcerated population there are suffering from serious mental illness.
Why was he on the street is the question. Why was he on the street?
Because we have a broken system.
They lowered his bail. He had a bail he couldn't pay. Then they lowered the bail, and then he could pay it. Imagine if you're this family. I mean, and they look at 33 prior arrests, and why? Why was this man on the street? What would stop him in your administration from being on the street?
Because what we would do is actually address the systemic problems that would ensure that someone who goes through the system this many times is actually, his issues are addressed, the services are provided. Right now, all we have is going in and out, especially when it comes to mental health. I'll give you an example.
Where would he be in your world? Where would he be? In a mental institution?
He would actually be getting services from the first time that he was arrested, as opposed to having to go through them 33 times. If you look at the New York Times, they did an investigation on 1,000 different incidents of violent crime in the city tied to mental health episodes. Yeah. They found that so many of those same New Yorkers were failed by the interactions they had with the city when they went for help for mental health assistance. And that failure is a blight, it is a stain on our city, and it's a failure that I'm looking to fix by actually transforming this with the only comprehensive plan for public safety of any of the candidates. Because what we are going to do is put out a plan and a proposal that we have shared with New Yorkers to create the Department of Community Safety that would bring together all of these pre-existing silos that address mental health crisis, that address homelessness into one department, provide it with the funding necessary, and actually address this crisis.
Where do these people go, though, is my question. Are you going to put them in a mental institution so they can be taken care of, or are you going to leave them at home on medication? What's the plan?
There's a plan right now that allows for involuntary confinement, which I think should be a last resort because of the fact that when you look at the actual results, this is something that so often doesn't actually have what has been spoken about. But what we have today that actually works for New Yorkers with serious mental illness, there are things like Fountain House. This is a clubhouse model, peer-led rehabilitative treatment for New Yorkers with serious mental illness. It costs $4,000 to have someone in Fountain House.
Okay, so do you get the point, right? This is, again, I would argue the biggest threat of Zohram Mamdani's candidacy, his approach to crime. Okay, let's backtrack. This is in response to the fact that some respected church leader of the community got brutally stabbed to death by this crazy lunatic with a sword, okay? It's basically an Irina Zarutska 2.0 style situation. He first of all says that we need to stop the revolving door, which is referring to people who get arrested and then let out a million times, much like the guy who stabbed Irina or this character right here who stabbed this church leader. Yes, Zohram, do you know how you stop the revolving door? By closing the door. You keep them in jail. Right? You do not let them back out into society time and time again. But of course, Zohram fully supports letting them back into society because, as is pointed out, we've talked about on the channel many times, he's a major advocate of bail reform. If you think New York's policy with letting people out after they commit violent crimes right now is a problem and it's bad, Zohram has made it clear he actually thinks that it doesn't go far enough. He's been criticizing DAs for being too tough on crime in New York City, and that's not years ago. That is recently on the campaign trail. So just so you understand, okay? And then he's confronted on, well, isn't that policy kind of insane? He says, no. The real issue is mental health. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Maybe you could make that argument that these people should be institutionalized. Maybe a prison is not as good a solution as a mental insane asylum. But of course, you know the history of the Democrat Party dating back to the 1980s. They're the ones who want to close the mental insane asylums. So then you get down to the root of it. What is his real solution? Basically, as he brings up, a peer-led rehabilitative voluntary program. In other words, we're going to sit at this restorative justice meeting and all sing Kumbaya and talk about our feelings, and let's send a social worker and a psychiatrist to deal with people. And that should have been, according to Zohram, the solution for Irina Zarutska, first of all, the guy who did that, and secondly, the guy with the sword that just stabbed this individual in New York City. Do you see how insane this person is? Okay? And as I said, he wraps it in these, like, ironically chat GPT style talking points so it sounds good, it sounds smart, but no, you break down the reality of exactly what he is saying, much alike, by the way, this is not even speculation, BLM said many of these things back in 2020 about criminal justice reform. And ever since, pro-George Soros, pro-BLM style DAs got elected in major cities, what have been the real life consequences of that? Yes, violent criminals take over the city, as you could probably expect, right? So that's what happens in reality when you say a cash bail is inequitable to poor people. Oh, yeah. Or, maybe we should not be locking up people for minor things. Oh, yeah, that's what happens. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, and that's Zohram's solution. Let's sing Kumbaya so that crazy lunatics with swords stop stabbing people. Okay.
For a year. That's the cost of being on Rikers for 3 days. And what we see, however, is that those services, they increase employment by 50%, they reduce hospitalization by up to 45%, and they actually reduce the cost of healthcare as well for those same New Yorkers. This is what we're looking at. This is why we say that Rikers is broken, the system is broken.
You can just see.
That's because the people who are coming generally for those mental health, like small rehab style programs, are suffering with more minor mental health issues. Okay, just to be clear, right? That's more like, oh, we have depression and let's go to therapy or something like that. Okay, maybe that can work sometimes for people. And sure, maybe it helps their lives, whatever. That's much different than like crazed schizophrenics or like super violent people. Okay, send them to that restorative justice meeting. See what happens, right? I'm sure, if a therapist just sat down and talked to them, they wouldn't have been, stabbing random civilians in the streets. This is such a dangerous application of, I don't know what you want to call it, blank slate theory or something, that a lot of liberals tend to believe that, if we just have an intervention, maybe we could solve. No, a lot of people are actually just like violent and insane, okay? And in order to protect the 99% of society from the 1%, that 1% has to be closed off from society, okay, frankly. And we're open to rehabilitation. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but there is a certain cohort of the population who always will just have to be fenced off from the 99%. And at the point where you say the opposite, at the point where you allow that crazy 1% to take over, that's how you get, for instance, Irina Zarutska on the subway. So just saying.
People who are suffering up and down 8th Avenue, just as one example. And I hope we'll have a chance to talk more about that next time. But I don't want you to leave without me asking you about your relationship with the police, because obviously this is a big issue. You said in the past, I almost don't need to go through it, it's been said many times, but that you called the police force racist, said they were a major threat to public safety, called them wicked and corrupt. And now the report that you apologized to 24 members of the NYPD. What did you say to them?
I apologized for the language that I used, and I spoke to them about the fact that I want to work with them to deliver public safety. Because what we're seeing in the city right now is we're asking officers to do nearly everything we can think of. We used to ask officers to focus on serious crimes. Now we're asking them to focus also on the mental health crisis, to focus also on homelessness. In 1 year alone, the NYPD receives 200,000 mental health calls. In 1 year.
Yeah, and you know what they told me? That 1 out of 3 of those, the person they're very, very dangerous interactions. You're going to send a social worker in there?
You can always have a police officer actually come to address that. But look, you're saying 1 out of 3. 2 out of 3 times, if you don't need the police and you're sending them to do that, then why aren't you sending them to respond to shootings and murders? 5-6 years ago, the response time for officers was closer to 10 minutes. Now it's closer to 16 minutes. New Yorkers deserve a police department that is asked to do the things that it can possibly do, not one that covers the failures of every break in the social safety net.
Okay, so what he is saying is something you've heard since 2020, which is send a social worker. Right? The police shouldn't be having to deal with that. Now, first of all, other cities have tried the send a social worker thing, i.e. Los Angeles, and guess what it has expectedly resulted in? A bunch of violence against social workers. It doesn't work. It's ludicrous, okay? But he points out, well, of all mental health episodes, only 1 in 3 are violent. So what about the other 2 to 3? You can send a social worker there, right? Except, how do you know ahead of time going into a mental health episode whether or not it's going to be violent? You understand how stupid that is? You're either going to have a blanket policy of send the police or send the social worker, because you don't have no idea, right? This person may sound really violent on the phone. You get there, they're peaceful, or they may seem really peaceful on the phone. You get there, they're violent. You have no idea. That's why you send the police, dingus, okay? So again, so what are you going to do? How are you going to differentiate who's going to be violent or not? You can't, because again, you don't know until you get there and see the person and how they actually respond to you in real life. Idiot. But hey, it sounds nice. Oh, let's send the social workers, guys. And then, on the question of the police, you say they're being overstretched in doing their jobs. Oh, so maybe you're saying we should hire more police officers, right? If the response time is going down, if they're overworked, okay. Well, let's find out if he wants to hire more police officers, like his opponent, Andrew Cuomo, and obviously Curtis Lewa, the Republican, are advocating to do.
Police officers that I spoke to, they don't want a behind closed doors apology. They want a broad public apology for the things that you suggested about them. Will you do that right now?
Absolutely. I'll apologize to police officers right here, because this is the apology that I've been sharing with many rank and file officers. And I apologize because of the fact that I'm looking to work with these officers, and I know that these officers, these men and women who serve in the NYPD, they put their lives on the line every single day. And I will be a mayor that
What changed your mind about it?
I moved to the city when I was 7 years old. Yeah. I grew up here.
He wanted to get elected.
And two of the things that I thought often about was safety and justice. And growing up here, learning about the case of the exonerated five, learning about Sean Bell, learning about Eric Garner, learning about Michael Brown. And then in 2020, the year where all of these tweets are referring to, it was the year when George Floyd was killed. And it felt like safety and justice had never been further apart. And it was actually Eric Adams in 2021 who said that New Yorkers need not choose between these two things. Mm-hmm. And so one of my focuses was, how do we deliver that justice? And now what I know, having represented 100,000 people in Western Queens, is that to deliver that justice, you have to also deliver that safety. And that means representing the men and women in the NYPD. It means representing the black and brown New Yorkers who've been victims of police brutality. It means representing the Muslim New Yorkers in my district who were surveilled on the basis of their faith.
And 68% of independent voters want more police officers on the street. And Cuomo, tomorrow night in that debate, he's going to say, I'm going to bring 5,000 more police officers to the street. Will you match that and agree with him on that?
I don't look to Andrew Cuomo for leadership.
And will you put 5,000 more cops on the street?
I've been very clear. I want to keep the number of officers that we have, and I want to make it easier for those officers to do their job. And what that means is that we allow officers to focus on serious crimes, and for all of the focus on the head count, we should focus on the retention crisis. When I started running for mayor, 200 officers were leaving the department every month. Mm-hmm. Now it's 350. And a lot of them are leaving because there's simply no way they can do their job in what's being asked of them. And to your point, however, Andrew Cuomo is going to say a lot of things tomorrow night on the debate stage. And frankly, I wish it was more like NASCAR, so New Yorkers could see the billionaires that were sponsoring him right on his suit jacket. Because this is a man who had 10 years. And I know now that it's politically convenient, he watches Fox News as well. So I'll just speak to him directly. Andrew, you had your chance to lead this state. You took that time to sell out working class New Yorkers to your billionaire donors. And instead of actually meeting the needs of people who couldn't afford to live in the city, you gave $959 million in tax breaks to Elon Musk. And now you want us to believe that we can't spend less money than that to make every bus fast and free in the same city.
All right.
Okay, well, on that last point, honestly, fair credit to Zohram. He's not wrong about that. Okay, Cuomo's not really the strongest candidate. I would argue for that very reason. The reason why Mamdani's destroying him in the polls and beat him in the primary is largely thanks not to the fact that everyone, even the Democrats, are socialists, but also because Cuomo just not that strong of a candidate. But still, let's break down what he said there about the police, right? He's correctly calling out, and this is the thing about Zohram. He sometimes diagnoses problems accurately. His solution to it is idiotic and insane, right? So, yes, the police in NYPD are having a retention crisis. A lot of them are leaving. They're going to states like Florida. They just don't want to work in this crap anymore. And yes, it's because they're dealing with a lot. But Zohram's idea is not to hire more police so that the police force are less overstretched. He's just saying, oh, well, we'll start sending social workers. We already addressed how dumb that is. But I'd secondly like to point out, a lot of problems that NYPD feel, it's not because they are not able to do their jobs. It's because they're not allowed to do their jobs, right? When you have such a high tolerance for crime and antisocial behavior as they do, or when police do their jobs, arrest a violent criminal, and that criminal is back out on the street the next day committing crimes again, and then they have to go arrest them again, and it's a repeating cycle, the revolving door, as you call it, Zohram, right? Then yeah, obviously the police work gets very difficult. Because what is, you're arresting the same guy basically every single day. And then what happens? When a new criminal spawns up, then you got to go after. So that's why it's a disaster, Zohram. It's a disaster in NYPD because of left-wing criminal justice, quote-unquote, policies, But But anyways, that said, guys, there you basically have it. Just wanted to react to that. And again, you can just see the repeated pattern of Zohram, again, well-spoken guy, articulate. I'll give him that. But when you break down the root of everything he's saying, it's insane. Like, it's radical. A lot of it is just dumb. It doesn't make any sense. But, what else do you expect from a guy who is basically like despite claiming he's anti-status quo, he actually is a career politician. The only real job he's ever worked in his life is as a state assemblyman, and just doesn't really understand anything, does he? All right, that said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.